Ladies and gentlemen, Cicely Blain.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Janice, for inviting me to come and speak and to be part of the KDocs Festival. Really exciting, and I'm also really grateful to be here on Coast Salish lands, where I've been a settler for almost 6 years now. So the film that we're going to watch today, Generation Revolution, speaks to the importance of community organizing and activism, particularly from people of color, young people of color, black and brown bodies. It's based in London, but I think the story is hugely relevant to any community. So that's why I want to talk a little bit about why Black Lives Matter is so important to me and also so important to the city of Vancouver and to Canada and, yeah, to so many communities everywhere. So I'm sure many of you know what Black Lives Matter is, but if you don't, it is a political organization that began in 2013, and it was based out of struggle against police violence happening in the United States. So after the murder of a young man named Trayvon Martin, he was 16 years old, he was shot and there was no justice served, and he was actually posthumously placed on trial for his own murder. And so this was obviously not the first instance like this, but it was a wake-up call, an awakening, and a call to action for people to rally around black communities and black bodies, and especially young black men who are disproportionately targeted and criminalized and murdered without justice, particularly in the United States, but this is an issue that encompasses Canada and many other parts of the world as well. So the Black Lives Matter movement really grew, and there is almost 100 official chapters in the United States, in Canada, the UK, Palestine, Brazil, all over the world. And we're really proud to be the second official chapter in Canada. The first one was BLM Toronto, which started in, I think, 2014. And in solidarity with BLM Toronto, we decided to start a chapter here in Vancouver in 2016. And since then we've been working really hard to bring to light some of the issues that Black Canadians experience and kind of align our movement with what's happening in the US, but also be able to put a Canadian spin on that and allow people to truly understand the plight of Black Canadians and Afro-Canadians, and help people to really come together to support Black lives in a global context and not just think of it as an American issue. So a lot of people ask, why is there a need to have a Black Lives Matter chapter in Vancouver or in Canada? It's such a peaceful nation, there's no problems here, we're beyond racism, we're beyond sexism, et cetera, et cetera. And so I hope many of you agree that it is important to have a Black Lives Matter chapter here in Vancouver, but I think it's always important to just kind of talk through some of the issues that we focus on and are often highlighted to us by other Black folks living in the city. So some of the things that kind of inspired us to start the chapter was primarily disbelief. So disbelief in our experiences of racism, and some of them may not be explicit or grand. They might just be small microaggressions or small instances of racism. But the main problem that we faced was people not believing, in the existence of Black people in the city. So when we started Black Lives Matter Vancouver, it was mainly just a social platform, and a lot of the comments we would get online is, oh, there's Black people here? Or, why do you need to have a chapter here when there's no Black people living in this city? So our first event was really about visibility, and a lot of our campaigns since then have really been about visibilizing the Black community, so sharing art and music and culture and poetry of Black folks living in the city. And then there's also the issue of the erasure of Black history and the contributions of Black folks to Canadian society and specifically to Vancouver. So hopefully many of you know about Hogan's Alley, which was an area in Strathcona, just near Chinatown, that was home to a very big and thriving community of Black folks, mainly in the 60s and 70s was when it was really in its element. And unfortunately, that area was then completely razed to the ground, and a lot of the community hubs, the housing, the businesses owned by Black people were erased from the city for the building of the Georgia Viaduct. And a lot of people don't know about this history. There are some signs up around Strathcona, but I don't think it really does justice to the thriving community that was there, that we only really know about through small snippets of photographs or research that people like the Black Strathcona Project or Wade Compton and people like that have done about the area. A lot of people really don't know anything about Hogan's Alley, so I do implore you to find out about it. There is a Black Strathcona walking tour that you can do on your phone as you walk around Chinatown and the Strathcona area. But I think what that really represents is how the city of Vancouver did not see the Black community as worthy or as valued enough to have their own community space or have their own area of the city that they could call theirs. And instead they felt it was more necessary to just knock it down and build a highway for the convenience of other people in the city. And I think although that might seem like a historical element, it actually kind of lays the foundation for how Black folks are treated in the present day as kind of like not really belonging to the city or not really having a stake in the city of Vancouver and what it means to be a Vancouverite. And I think that kind of, in some ways, subconsciously, kind of translates into the imaginary and into the narrative of Black folks living in Vancouver. So I also want to talk a little bit about police violence. So as you may know, Black Lives Matter has been campaigning over the past couple of years to have the uniformed police removed from the Vancouver Pride Parade. And so that's work that's been really important to us, and not just the Vancouver chapter, something that's been universal across many Black Lives Matter chapters across Canada and across the United States and many other countries as well. And I won't go into too much detail because it's a long story, but essentially this really stems from the idea that policing institutions and systems of policing are often inherently biased or inherently anti-Black. And so it is part of our work to try to ensure that all communities are safe and not exposed to those forms of violence. And I think particularly in Canada as well, there is a lot of anti-indigeneity within institutions and within systems of law enforcement and policing. So it became really important for us, and it became a passion project for us to try to reclaim space within the LGBTQ movement, because that's a space where, for example, the first Pride Parade was actually started by a Black trans woman, Marsha P. Johnson, and many members of her community, other trans women of color, and yet it's a movement that has become heavily whitewashed over the years, and a lot of those histories, again, the history of Black folks' contribution to something being erased. So it's really important for us to try to bring that knowledge back to people in Vancouver and kind of encourage people to start afresh, because we can't have active and armed and uniformed police officers in an event that's meant to be celebrating marginalized communities, while simultaneously those same police forces are still continuing to criminalize, brutalize, and violate the rights of other marginalized groups. And again, that's another thing a lot of people say, that doesn't happen in Vancouver. It certainly does to many marginalized groups, many people of color, communities of color. There are many instances, in fact, just last week, an instance of a UBC football player who was Black being unnecessarily profiled by the police. And it often ends in a much more violent, unnecessarily violent altercation than if that person was white, for example. So those instances are definitely happening in Vancouver, but I think regardless of whether they happen here or not, there are systems in place that we do learn a lot from the United States. In fact, half of the Vancouver Police Department do actually attend training in the United States. So I think a lot of people try to make that difference and try to place that border there when it's actually not there. There is a lot more fluidity. And I think finally I just want to mention about how important Black Lives Matter is as a movement to me. As a queer person, there have been very few spaces, particularly Black activist spaces, where Black queer folks have been able to take up so much space and be able to be the forefront of those movements. And I think a lot of people always ask me, like, you know, what would Martin Luther King think of the Black Lives Matter movement? And on one hand, I'm like, well, he'd be pretty upset that we still have to do this. But on the other hand, I think also, I don't know how he would feel that so many like strong women and so many queer folks are taking up so much space in the movement. And I think that places me in a really difficult and conflicting place. And yeah, because as I said, we're trying to increase how much the LGBTQ community respects Black folks, but then in a similar way, we also looking for that kind of validation and respect from other Black communities as well. So yeah, being part of Black Lives Matter-Vancouver has been yeah, an incredible place for me, and many of the other folks on the team are queer and trans, and it's really like a revolutionary space that there really hasn't been in Black activism before. And I think that's why it's such a profound and such a revolutionary movement, because it was founded by 3 Black queer women, and yeah, one of who's just released a memoir called When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir, which is a really powerful read, and she talks a lot about how, yeah, as a Black queer woman, she's sort of denied that right to take up space and denied access to, yeah, access to her own voice and yeah, public speaking and things like that. And so, yeah, I think I just wanted to impart, like, Black Lives Matter is not only an important movement for the city, for Black liberation globally, but also particularly for Black, queer, and trans folks who have so often been, yeah, denied rights and denied space and denied access to certain movements. It's been, yeah, it's been revolutionary and it's been powerful. Thank you.